So as René mentioned earlier, this year we wanted to have some focus on the user experience. So we are now having a panel discussion about perspectives on UX in e-commerce search. So what does it mean? I mean, perspective, like in this example, it's one situation, but very different perspectives. Perspective also means that you look into the future somehow. Otherwise, it would just be another angle of something. So that's what we'd like to discuss. Just out of curiosity, because we asked ourselves up front, would you be the guy on the boat or the guy on the island? Can you show up for the boat? Who would like to be on the boat? Who would like to be on the island? Okay. Yeah, maybe I should have said that there are only two choices. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so we start. I'm Sebastian. I'm product manager at Tudock. As I said before, I'm just a host. We have Ángel, CEO from Empathy. He's an advocate of ethical commerce, trust, and topics like this. Aparna is a consumer behavior researcher and is UX research lead at OpenSearch. And René works at director e-commerce at OpenSource Connections and has the view of a result quality expert. Is that the right word? So we start with Ángel's perspective.
Yeah, great. So I'm going to be brief and just share with you before we start the conversation 3 simple ideas. I see them as pathways when I try to build this digital empathy perspective. Yeah. If you can carry on, the first idea is that of search as communication. I don't know if this resonates to you, but when I was first exposed to search academically, it might have happened to you, it was within the space of information retrieval, right? You know, an information system, information retrieval. Well, it took me a few years to realize that besides that, which in essence is right, it's also fair to say that it's a communication system. And this is very important because it sets a before and an after. An information system or information retrieval is not concerned with the sender of a message as an individual, as a person. An information system or information retrieval doesn't understand that the user is a subject, not an object, who has desires, who has emotions, who has thoughts and feelings that are entangled. So that's very important, that point. Well, you can carry on to those 3 words. And I also have put some art in there. If anybody is interested for the choices, I'll be happy to speak about that later. So when you start to look at search as an information communication system, you think in terms of a sender that is a human being. You think in terms of a message whose quality is determined by the context. And then your system that is going to provide an answer. But it's very important that there is a human element in the equation that I believe we forget. So we go to the next idea, is that of mechanization. And let's go through the 3 words. Mechanization as in standardization and rationalization of search. We, as professionals, have become experts of too little, too much of too little. We have come to rationalize search, so rationalize the user, so much intent, seen as a sequence of events, choice, seen as something that is causal and consequential to something that is presented on the flat plan of a device screen, or behavior as something that is non-concentric or unaware of the circumstances that take place in the real world or in the thought process. We have rationalized so much search, reduced it, narrowed it down so much that we have been irrational to a point of becoming irrational about what search is in the mechanistic view of what the user is. And that's terrifying because a user is not an object. It's not a thing. It's not a lifeless and mysterious object that triggers its actions on the basis of what it's struck with. As any of you is a human, with choice and behavior and intent and a mystery still remain a mystery for the most part. So mechanization leads me to the last point. Once I finish, sorry, if you go one more before I forget, we talk about all the mechanization of search, rationalization of search in ethicalalliance.co. If you want to know more about that, it's a collection of retailers that try to elevate the object user as a subject. It's a very interesting forum. And then lastly, the point of ideation, more there, to create something new with search, we have to look outside search. You cannot make a difference in search by becoming more and better on data-given signals. You have to do some cross-pollination. You have not to be afraid to cross some disciplinary boundaries. And by that, I mean to connect different spaces of an ideation. And for that, we also have the Open Innovation Venture with contribution from Vodafone, Kroger, Carrefour, and many other companies that they go into workshops and sessions, and we ideate outside of the standardization and the given notions of the rationalistic view of search, new opportunities in search. So I'll pass it over to you, Aparna.
There may be a few questions. So you are more on the irrational side, I guess, when it comes to decisions, or do you say it's a mix?
If I'm more on the what, sorry?
On the irrational side. So if you think buying decisions more, there is a view that says it's a rational thing. I personally don't believe it. And do you believe it's an irrational thing?
Well, I think my own choices, my own behaviors, my own intents hold incredible complexity. I don't think I'm entitled to know with certainty the behaviors or the intents of a user. I think I can become paradoxically irrational if I think that behaviors are rational. So yeah, I think that's a temptation, but it's a necessary temptation. Nobody feels comfortable in the ambiguous disarray of not knowing what a user wants. And for that desire to put that in order, we sacrifice the ambiguity and the mystery of behavior, the concentric, concurrent nature, and all that stuff. Yeah. So yeah, you could call it so rational we have become, the industry, I mean, that is irrational. So I want to go back to rationality, but rationality embraces the ambiguity of choice. Yeah.
So, and you are talking a lot about trust, for example. How can you create trust and transparency in an e-commerce setup without overwhelming the user with options and information? Because transparency always means information. Choice means you have to give some options. How do you do that?
To simplify, there are two avenues. And one avenue, you can take a purely data-driven approach. So you say, I'm going to elicit the feeling of trust by looking at data signals. So data, from the Latin datum, given, I take a passive role and I say, trust means this or trust means the other because the data says so. And the other avenue is that you embrace that trust is a feeling. And as such, it's not within the narrow signals I can capture. Perhaps I can benefit from those signals, but I need to accept that there's more to trust than that which data can provide. So I have to build and innovate and create such capabilities, then accept that the user wants to feel trusted, that the user wants to feel that trusts this place, regardless of the fact that data cannot consider that as important because it cannot grasp the fullness of it. I don't know, it might be a bit of an abstract answer, but hopefully you get it. Yeah.
Okay, so.
Yeah. All right. So my name is Aparna Sundar. I'm here from Seattle. I do think I should ground myself or ground the audience here in my journey here, just so you see my point of view and where I'm coming from. I appreciate the design thinking, the empathy part of it. My career started as a designer myself, and I was an architect, and then I went into design, did my master's in design, and then I went into marketing. which is, so I was actually, my master's was in marketing as well. And then because I was so bored, I went and got a PhD in cognitive science. So I am a cognitive scientist. I have contributed multiple scholarly articles on how human beings, and I think we can change, how human beings do three basic things. And you probably touched on it. So essentially with theories of how we look at humans, we know that very centered to the human are these emotions, thoughts, and essentially behavior. So with that premise, I'm currently with OpenSearch project. I am a research lead. I help designers, I help product developers, and then also the community because it's an open source product. And so I leverage all my background to help them. Going back to the topic of when I look at e-commerce here, I'm thrilled that René invited me here just because I see a lot of different aspects of consumer behavior that are being teased here, and we can really push the envelope quite a bit. To your point earlier, in terms of us being so rational, we're irrational, a lot of your models here that I saw today are based on choice modeling. Essentially, you give a person, in this case, the consumer, a choice. What are they going to do? What are they going to choose? Where are they going to click? What is their follow-through behavior? And this is all recorded as, you know, a number, just to digitize it, and then you can go and run your models, things like that. That is based on that huge circle there, which is behavior. Essentially, what are they doing? What is a consumer doing right after they see a stimuli? They're clicking through, they're making a purchase, but everything is tracked, and so they have to do something. And I hear a lot of e-commerce folks say, I don't know what they're doing. There's so much of randomness. There's so much of variation. And the truth is, you're absolutely right. We can't tell what they want to do when they click on something. So then there are these other aspects that we can think of as human, as who we are as humans. And the first thing is cognition. So things like price comparison, sometimes color comparison, brand comparisons, all these fall under those rational choices that users or consumers are making. That's very valid. And some of you in your models also had used that in optimizing for selections and things like that. So that's absolutely fine. Now, this box in terms of affect, that becomes really interesting. So feelings, how people like something, love something, hate something, those valences are things that you cannot get with click behavior. You just don't know what they're doing. Did they like it? Did they go because they hated it? What do you do? And so earlier we talked about some of these methodologies. We can move on, I think. Some of these methodologies, yeah. So essentially, this is just a categorization of what are we talking about with behavior. We're looking at click-through, time spent on web pages, bounces. We're all looking at that as outcome metrics. So every time you're saying, I think earlier, one of my colleagues was saying that Google actually looks at what is the time spent on the page, and they want to get out as soon as possible. That's actually the outcome metric. And those are all behavioral. Cognitive in this particular case are any kind of query context, any kind of results of on the label. The human essentially is making these comparisons. You can get some indication of it through click behavior, but not all of it, because you really want to understand how are they rationally thinking. It's not a system, it is a human decision that they're making, regardless of what we're showing them in search results. And then finally, we have the affective use cases are for personalizations. There's also a lot of like larger order social signaling going on in there in terms of when you're thinking about, you know, let's say some kind of charitable donations, or you're going to, you know, affect a cause or something like that. So those kinds of things. So this is a very basic attitude model. And essentially, some of these things that we can measure are very objective. You mentioned that earlier too. In terms of everything objective can be digitized, and if it can be digitized and you can actually get your metric on that, you can actually capture that, is very objective. We can kind of run our models and see what we can do with that. Other things, when we're talking about any kind of subjective parameters in terms of, I think I heard something like the weather or seasonality, what were they thinking, things like that. Those are all high variation things, still something that can be predicted and modeled in some fashion, but essentially there's a lot of, I think René calls it fuzziness. So there's certainly a lot of fuzziness and a lot of squishiness there that that incrementally, as we study more, I am a scientist, so I do rely on data, and whether it's qualitative or quantitative, doesn't matter, data is data. I do rely on those mechanisms for that as well. All right, have you done with mine?
That's it, right?
That's fine? Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah,
So
with that, let's take a pause, yeah.
yeah, so maybe you can, because I'm mostly on the online experiment side and stuff, maybe you can explain how to get data for the other stuff. So for this decision making, where eye tracking or whatever, I don't know. Maybe you can.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about measuring, and I'm coming from a cognitive science background. So when we talk about measurement, I agree with you completely. Not everything can be measured, but I'm coming from a consumer behavior background where persuasion is a big part of consumer behavior and theories. And persuasion relies on measurement. You want to know where the baseline is, and you want to know where you can move it based on the baseline. So with that premise, not saying that I agree completely with your points, but all right, so you're talking about measurement, behavior, given, so again, consumer behavior is now looking at online behavior. Your tradition and your the background is from human behavior in stores, right? So in those contexts, things like purchase, how long the lines are, how much they spend, all that are ones that you can measure. Online, what you measure is what you can trace of the humans behaving there. Again, and in terms of cognitive measures, some of these things, so you can go from really choice-based and then slightly quantitative, choice-based as in like large models, right? Quantitative numbers, to a little bit more middle ground, psychographic measures, and then all the way to affective, where ethnographic, qualitative, all these interview techniques that we do with our users, customers, are all valid. There is a high level of subjectivity with qualitative and things like that, because you have that researcher subjectivity that comes. So nevertheless, these are quite robust and established methodologies of both capturing and also sound decision making. So if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So as Sebastian mentioned earlier, I'm Director e-commerce at OpenSource Connections. And I want to share the perspective of a consultant who tries to empower companies to improve on their search, become more mature in search, and optimize for search result quality. And I want to start with a very narrow perspective on UX, and that's UI design. And I want to start with an anecdote. I used to be a freelancer, and one day I received a call, and I was like, oh, René, we have to bring up our search session value to this and that amount. And I was thinking, well, great, it's a project upcoming, but I had also known that their search was already highly optimized. And then I did the math, and I thought they want to increase that by 40%. And that's impossible. Yeah. And I thought, okay, how can I tell them? And I was prepared to say, hey, you know, and so on. And then on the next call, I told them and then said, oh, we've already done the first 20%. and that was just done by an experiment on rearranging the call to action button. So they had a bit of a special model there. And that struck me really. And don't believe those figures. Yeah, so it was law of small numbers. Yeah, so and I hope you don't just wildly arrange your add to cart button. But what that told me is we spend so much time on improving relevance. Yeah, we have an entire team for re-ranking. 20 people maybe do that. And then we come out with 4% in some metric after a year. Yeah. And that is this very small company, yeah, so 13 people actually, the entire company, and they're very agile, and they just try to change in their UI. And I thought maybe this is undervalued, underappreciated, and I observed this more often than not, that teams don't really see that as an opportunity. And that's my first point. So search UI optimization is usually neglected And there is a number of reasons for that. Some are systematically, some can be improved, I think. First of all, I think the amount of people assigned to this role of a UI designer or UX researcher is way too small for what we do in search. And companies are ready to invest into engineering and data science, but it's really remarkable how little goes into UX. I remember a company making $1 billion a year in revenue, and they shared one UX person across the entire company. I'm not just talking about search. So, and that's not uncommon. Yeah, so that's a pattern. I can see folks from big companies here, so maybe for you, it might be a bit better. Your situation might be a bit better, but overall, I think it's a neglectance. The other aspect here is the fact that search-specific design requires some specific knowledge. Yeah? And that's also an experience I've made as a consultant. Often the people or the people's time is shared. So the designer's time is shared. So one day they do the checkout, the other day they do search. And maybe they start with a style guide from the company, yeah, and then apply some things to search that don't work. And that makes it really, really problematic. And I would say, if you look, for instance, at a thing like auto-completion, if you go to the top German e-commerce websites, look at their auto-completion, there even is one that has no auto-completion at all. Then you find some who highlight the prefix that the user entered. Then you find some that highlight the completion, and some get bonus points for graying out the background. Yeah, so you get this variety, but there's a best practice there to highlight the completion, to gray out the background, and this knowledge is not there. And I think that's a problem, and that needs to be built in with respect to UI. And in the context of this, I think we even lack the terminology or the clarity in the terminology when it comes to search specific UI. For instance, what's the difference between auto-suggest and auto-completion? Yeah, we tend to mix these things up. Years ago, Peter Morville wrote a book, Search Patterns, and basically these were all search UI patterns. And it's very clear, and I wish we could agree on a terminology, but we can't agree on a terminology if we don't have a community of search UI designers. Yeah, so I think that's a really bad position. So overall, I think we should be somewhere, or we should be in a better place if we can make a search UI a more defined topic and a better community somehow. And there are some best practices laid out somewhere, like the Baymart Institute. Yeah, if folks could access or read that and just follow what is there, they would be in a better starting point. What they would normally do is do something they call a competitor analysis, and then copy their not so good practices. Yeah, so that's probably a problem that we have to overcome. And the third problem I can see is that in search, the team topology can be adverse to this. Yeah, so we all work on a complex problem, and we tend to split into separate teams. So today we heard about one company having a front-end team and a back-end team. And how do they run experiments? Yeah, so there is a mutual dependency, which makes it hard to work on a feature. But search, on the other hand, is so complex that you need to find a split somehow, because you can't have like 50 people in larger companies, even more people working in search, and that's a challenge. We had a talk last year at MICES from Mikio about team topologies, and I think that's a huge point here that impedes our UI design. The second point I want to share is more, or goes beyond this narrow perspective of UI. And Open Source Connections has been known as a search relevance company. And earlier this year, I've written a blog post beyond search relevance, and there's more on search result quality than just relevance. And I would see this as part of an understanding that gets us from the search result quality via the user experience to the consumer experience. Yeah, that's an integrated thing. Yeah, we must not think that if we bring back good results, it's just matching the query. Yeah, so that's fulfilling a need that this person has in the real life. They want to do something, they want to benefit from our website. And that's what the search is about. Yeah? Understand that real thing that they want to do, and then think about how our search and our website can support them. Yeah. So what I want to say is, if you start thinking about search at the query level, so what's the query intent? That's too late. Yeah. And well, I think we've been there before today. So I want to reuse some drawings from my blog post and basically what we could identify, and we've also already built a training around that, understanding search result quality is, we start with the consumer and asked ourselves, why would they want to make a purchase, to what end? And that points to a thing they want to get done in the real world. Yeah, so it's not they want to have back great query results or search results. Yeah, it's about what they want to get done in the real world, and that means we need deeper understanding of what they want to do, and this is where it connects, or we create a connect between the search team and the UX researchers, or the UX researchers should be part of the search team in that sense. And I want to lay out a few aspects what goes into the search result quality once we start thinking from the consumer perspective or user perspective. So I use the example of a query toys, and the context might be I'm looking for my niece's birthday or a present to my niece for her birthday. I don't have a niece, by the way, just to avoid any rumors, right? So we issue the query, we enter the query toys, or I enter that, and I get back a number of toys, and I see this lovely teddy bear, but at that moment, it's just about getting back toys, yeah? And that's the aspect I'm labeling as having here. So what do I get, yeah, the what? And what will my niece have, my imagined niece at that point? And then further aspects go into my decision whether I like the result or not. And some are related to buying, yeah? So to the purchase, how much does it cost, when will it be delivered, but also maybe some reviews around that. So that's search result quality, yeah. And then the third aspect is, how do I feel about it? Yeah, imagine that niece being happy, and I walk with her, and contrast that with I give her a trumpet, yeah? And then how other people would react if she used that trumpet in the public. So the teddy bear is much nicer. Yeah? So that all goes into it. And some of these things are harder to understand. We can easily discuss about the having and understand that more easily. And that's where we can use kind of manual evaluation. But the other stuff needs more research and exploitation of feedback data as well.
Okay, so yeah. How do you, I wonder, because the example you gave was a very small team. I guess they didn't hire a researcher to find that out. On the other hand, you have large teams that also don't get there. So what do you think? Is it really maybe the part Aparna described that is missing, these interviews and personas and stuff maybe?
Well, I would say yes and no. So it depends on the team, right? So I think to drive search as a product, we need several sources that drive this. Yeah. So of course there are business requirements. That's what we usually focus on, but it's the most boring one. It doesn't generate a lot of insight, maybe about our business. The other one is exactly UX research. Yeah, run user interviews and see, look at recurrent patterns. I mean, it's difficult for a general retailer to find those cases, but you can still find recurrent patterns, and things like price or cozy. That looks cozy, or something that points at emotions can be identified. And the third source is actually data, but we can't find anything out by just looking at the data. So we need that context of the research, and I think that's a good practice then.
Yeah, so cool. I'm glad you're saying research, which is excellent. So one thing is something like this. This is a great example where all you need to do, and bringing on that personalization, conversation we had earlier. Thank you for that. Is things like this when you're talking about gift giving. We know that people buy differently for themselves than others. Just there's a whole literature on gift giving in consumer psychology, things like that. That can help inform the kinds of personalization you're asking the customer before they even start the journey of buying. It's not just going to a bar, like a search bar, typing words and getting results, right? If you give that context of, hey, I'm buying for myself versus other, give me a list of things I want you to keep in mind, my size, my shoe size, my everything, right? So that gives dimension. I think focusing, the research aspect of it comes in because it really gives dimension from someone who is clicking on results to someone who has this context and ways in which you can expand e-commerce to this personalized or this dimensionality, and in what direction, for what categories. People are not going to ask these questions if you're buying a car screwdriver or something like that, a very, let's say functional product, right? This kind of nuances and variabilities start to expand when you have individual differences, or in certain contexts like luxury products, fashion, things like that, right? So I think having that dimensionality on the person making the click is more important than trying to optimize for one solution in a particular experience.
I think that's very valid. On the other hand, there's still an opportunity to go globally or go global. I want to mention that example of Wallapop, who gave a talk last year about distance sensitivity of queries. So basically they realized, okay, we're classified ads, and for classified ads, usually the distance between the buyer and the seller can be important. And they figured out that it depends on the intent. So what I want to purchase. So usually if you just use distance as a ranking factor, you would say regardless of the query, regardless of what the user wants, I would make this a ranking factor. But they discovered through user research, through data analysis, that there is a variation. So some queries, some interests showed that distance matters, locality matters, and others not. And I think that's a great example of how we can combine UX research and data analysis into a useful outcome. But I agree that later on, you would still look at the personal perspective of that.
The main point is that opportunity for depth. Just changing the viewpoint is just, there's value in numbers and there's value in the click behavior. But I think the point is, once we start looking at dimensionality of the user, just one methodology of analyzing them may not be sufficient. We can use multi-methods for that.
So you talked about best practice as well. It's a topic I often have. So you try to build something that fits the usage pattern of your customers. And on the other hand, what do you do if you want to build something new? So there's no data maybe because you haven't shown that feature to anyone. There's no competitor who has it. It's not part of any existing research or something. How do you approach these things? That's a question I maybe ask Ángel first and then go through all of you.
Well, I think the most extraordinary, incredible, impactful relations that you arrive at in whatever invention, be it in search, come from that space. And the most conventional expected decimal points of what's in there come from the data-drivenly dictation from what's already there. I think when you don't have anything, as the first time a search experience had to be created, and then you start to have signals and you just follow those signals, you know, you have for 15 years pretty much the same experience in Google, right? But for a start, you have that empty canvas that you are happy because you're creative. And I think we need to, of course, follow what people do and where they step and follow those desired paths. But we also have to be inventive. And especially now that, you know, supposedly AI is going to come up with everything that can be inferred from data, we have to exercise that creative capacity. So I invite you to precisely, you know, use the data to put it in line to your intellectual exercise, not to put your intellectual creative exercise in line to data, because then you are not creating anything. You're just creating facts. You are not implementing new theories. You are implementing facts, right? A bit of a radical view, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I love it. I think like you, I was very thrilled that you say you start from zero. For a creative, there's nothing more exciting. So I totally love that. And going back to what I do for a profession, this is exactly what I'm doing in Buzzwords and MICES and what I was doing in Haystack. As you know, I'm helping the search team in OpenSearch, and I know nothing about the search relevance engineer. So I came to the conferences to learn more about you because I don't know much. So qualitative is great. And in fact, first steps in design thinking are to explore the unknown, know that which you don't know, because if you make assumptions, especially when there's unknown, you're either going to be grossly misled or it's going to be iterative and you're learning on you're kind of magnifying the biases, right? So the first step of design thinking is to go wide, go into the unknown. Qualitative is great. Talk to people like René, Charles, you, Stavros, understand what does the user do? What are their motivations? Who they are, what they're trying to accomplish, what tooling are you trying to give them? And then once you understand some of that, make some assumptions based of that and then iteratively improve. But starting from zero is actually a very good place because that's when you're truly learning about which you don't know. So you're not reinforcing biases, you're actually challenging your biases.
Yeah. So my take on this is, I think I have 2 points. One is focus on the problem. So you can't say, oh, I'm creative, I create a new form of UX. So that goes wrong. So that must not be the objective. The objective must be the problem or to solve the problem. And I think the other point is, and that goes back to my initial item here, we need to be very solid in using existing patterns. It sounds boring, but you can only break existing stuff once you've mastered it. And you must only do this once you have a good reason to. So even if it's a new problem, I would say you will find familiar things. And I agree to the point that you must not repeat your biases and must be aware of them. But it's not like reinventing everything, and you must start from the known point. And the users, they are so much used to certain patterns. So I think it's more often than not, it's more a gradual thing where you deviate. Yeah. So no, you don't need to.
So I think especially the last year was full of AI breakthroughs and going mainstream, and I guess a lot of people from the audience actually see some chances here. So my question to all of you is, do you think it will actually change the UX, or do you think it will, in the near future, only improve existing stuff like we heard autocomplete, spell corrections, all these things? Or do you think there will be a new kind of UX we didn't know yet? Maybe who wants?
I don't know, which is beautiful. It's fine. But it's not going to be a change, whatever the nature, whatever the type. It's going to be a slow transition that might be accentuated or accelerated, but it's a slow transition. You know, it's not like when you look at something that is changing in front of you, it's going to progress, okay? And it's going to progress because, of course, we're dealing with a human being that wants to communicate, to express, and that is a process that is affected by the notion of the person as per to what this person is talking to, considering talking a query. So when you speak to a child, you know that you're speaking to a child. When you speak to a Nobel Prize, I never had the chance, you will know that you speak to a Nobel Prize. And when you speak to a thing, an object, you know it's it. It's not I or you, right? So we are not going to change that. You know, whatever whole computer is going to come, we know that we're talking to it. And that's very important because the transitions and evolutions we're going to do in that progression are always going to be constrained by the notion that I am communicating, querying with an object, not with nature or with a person or with art. I don't know. So that constraints, yeah.
Yeah. So this is a very interesting question. In fact, even when I was seeing auto presentation, I was kind of thinking about this as well. And I actually think that because I'm situated, my focus is on the user. The user has not changed since when we, you know, had civilization. We've been buying things, we've been trading, bartering a chair for a fish and all those things. Selling has not changed over civilization. It's not changed at all. The user has not changed. They've done the same thing. Now, the ways in which we sell have changed from the outdoor market into a store, into now online, and now you have AI. I kind of feel like looking at how we talk to Alexa, I do think it's a she, like I make my voice modulation to a she, so it's good enough to fool me. Yeah, I know it's a it, but just whatever. But so I actually think AI is giving that dimension of a salesman, of a salesperson, not so much changing your e-commerce premise, but it's giving that added, I go to a store, I'm browsing around, I'm getting the dress I want, I'm doing stuff, to someone coming and saying, hey, you really look good in red or whatever, right? That's what AI can give the conversation. And if e-commerce as a field can accommodate for that other, like from the user perspective, this is an influencer. This is someone that can suggest something. I think we don't think of it in the same dimension that we're thinking about e-commerce in terms of search and ranking, but thinking about it in search and ranking and this additional weightage that you're going to give when you have an expert or whatever the AI is, the roles you can play with AI roles. Or whatever it is, and then also the fact that it can remember things, right? So I think there's opportunity for this to evolve, and yeah, so I think there's opportunity there.
Yeah, so for me, I think it's again a bit of a challenge to see so many new solutions, yeah, and then we have to go back and see what's the problem that we solve with that. And I think at the moment we are overwhelmed with solutions, but we don't really look at the problem. And folks try to throw those new solutions at old problems and try to just, you know, replace things that we've already been doing with new stuff, but it does the same thing. And so, and I think that's not right. And as you pointed out, now we could have a shop assistant, so to say, and it becomes a personality, whatever that is. On the other hand, we have to be very sure where exactly we use that and when. So some of you might know I like the buying decision process as a kind of a guide through the through search and what do we do at which stage of the buying decision process. And a solution like a chatbot, where would it come in? Yeah, so like Shopify has released shop.ai. Zalando announced they will release a chatbot, but I struggle seeing where in this buying decision process a chatbot would come in. Yeah, so maybe not where we are in the search in the buying decision process when it comes to search. Yeah, so maybe it's at the earlier stages where I don't know how to search, I don't know what to search for, but that oftentimes doesn't even happen online. Yeah? So that happens way before. And many companies I've worked with, they say users come to our website very close to the buying decision. And I would assume users at that stage would know what they search for, or at least have a vague idea and can try out things. And then there's this additional effort that conversation requires us cognitively, versus just entering a few keywords and then visually browsing through results. So my point is, to adapt those technologies, we need to become more experimental in the point of UX and also see it as a UX. Yeah, try out things. It's the first cut of using your AI should not be trying to become better at certain KPIs, but to learn how those interactions work.
Okay, so I think we go to the questions from the audience because we only have 10 minutes around left. So are there any questions?
Yeah, thanks for the insight. You mentioned quite often like understanding the context of the user. And I think there was a nice slide like, oh, it's my niece's birthday and I search for toys. So I wonder how much, ChatGPT could, or large language models could help here understanding the context. So we could evolve like from a small search bar to like a large text box where I type, oh, it's my niece's birthday. She lives in Berlin. She's 6 years old and she likes teddy bears. Can you recommend me toys or recommend anything to give her, and then somehow use that context information?
So maybe I go first. If a chatbot knew implicitly that it's my imagined niece's birthday, then I would be scared. So we have something like in-session personalization. This has been around for quite some time, and we know that we can have models that learn a bit from a session. There's this other aspect, and I want to mention Arne, whose thought is this that I'm sharing. He said, maybe we need something more like a general personal assistant that we would trust more and use this across websites, and the context comes from there. And I think that could be a way I could see it work, but otherwise I think that would be difficult. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know.
So I think it's really important to understand the stage of purchase behavior that you're talking about. If you're telling this entity, this is the context, what should I do? It means you haven't made up your mind what you're gonna get. You're not shopping around, you're asking. So I think there are theories in buyer behavior on stages of purchase, information search, and doing your kind of comparing and then making a decision to purchase, things like that. So to understand where in that purchase process, e-commerce / your website, your search bar, or your chatbot comes in is important, because otherwise you could give everyone a chatbot and they're like, I don't want to chat with you, I want to buy something. Thank you very much. So I think understanding that and doing due diligence, but understanding where does a customer want information? Like for me, if I had to buy a part for my husband's car, I would totally have a chatbot and chat incessantly till I get to that decision of what I'm buying. Then I would go to the bar and look for it, because I don't know what I'm looking for, right? So I think it's important to understand that user, again, multidimensionally, and not give everyone a chat box or a search bar, because there are different stages to purchase decisions.
Yeah, another one. Yeah.
So you were talking about trust and communication, that the query answer is basically a communication from us to the user, and you were also talking about new things. What do you think can we do as e-commerce companies to improve trust, and maybe what could be a new thing that we could add to somehow make ourselves more trustworthy to the user?
I think the best reference we have in the real world, right? When I walk into a shop, the way the interaction happens, when I walk into a cafe, you know, when I have a conversation with somebody inside the shop and the way that interaction is happening, in essence, it respects my privacy. It's not going to write down what I touched, what I didn't, what I looked, what I tried. It's just, I go in there and I say goodbye and I have a conversation and engage. And sometimes we forget about the common sense, as you said, commerce, which, you know, also very interesting Latin origin, but from, you know, the essence of relations, right? And I think on this idea of hyper-rationalizing, resourcing to the instruments that digital offers to us, we have elicited this trust. And we feel uncomfortable as consumers in some of those occasions when those, you know the use cases and the stories. So just think in the way things happen in the real world and use that as a, you know, as a threshold and take it from there. Yeah.
I just want to say one thing on trust, right? Consumers will trust things on multi-levels, right? From brand name, right? To a whole host of things. For you as someone creating like your search results and things like that, the easiest way to lose trust if they're looking for something and you're giving them something at random, inaccurate, not getting it. So I think getting it right, this is why relevance is really super important, because that's the easiest way to break trust. It's like, you're no good, I'm going to go to the next site, or, you know, maybe you don't have this, or things like that. But the larger thing of, you know, consumer trust, of course, you have brand, you have reputation, data privacy policies. Those may not be in your control. That's up to your clients' data handling policies, things like that. But at the very least, I think accuracy, and since we're now trying to be intelligent as systems, really improving precision can, at the very basic level, improve trust.
I want to add one final thought. It could also be, it's building on what you said, so bring back trustful results, more or less. It could also be about explaining results. Yeah, so if we, like vector search, we bring back more results for long tail, but then users might get frustrated because they don't understand why these results come back. So they don't find their keywords in there. And we could just be honest and say, okay, we couldn't find anything for your keywords, but you might also be interested in this. And there are more things to make search a bit more explainable, and that builds a relationship with the customer.
So thank you everyone for the panel. When I'm designing a new product, one trick I use is before doing anything with professional designers or anything, I imagine what I would do if I were the software. All of me, I'll play the software and answer. So I'm going to try to take Angel's advice and René's advice. Angel's advice to treat the shopper as a whole person, as a subject, and René's advice to understand their underlying needs and have this conversation with my user. So the user comes in and says, I want your most expensive teddy bear. Yes, that's great. Here's this Steiff collectible, this and such. It's $2,000 and we can have it to you tomorrow. Great, I'll have one. But wait, why do you want this? Oh, it's my grandson's birthday. And I haven't seen him for a year and I want something that will make a big impression. So, well, maybe you should see your grandson more often. And you know, the expensive teddy bear, that's going to impress the parents, but I don't think the child will really enjoy it. I suggest this $2 teddy bear, but I also suggest you visit him every week. How's that?
Excellent. Yeah, I think that gets a bit personal, right? So
Yeah, it might be stuff, yeah.
But it's a reminder, thank you for that, that growth and success, whether it's in an online store or individual level, it has to meet ethics. Otherwise, it's no success. The ethical thing is to do whatever you think is the right thing, right? But if there is an opportunity to exercise some rightness in your perspective, everyone has their own perspectives, it's the right thing to do. There are plenty of examples of online shops that take a strong stand in ethics and a strong stand in sustainability, and there are money-making machines, right? And they long last. They've been 150 years in business, and they will most likely be another 150 years or more, right? So anyway, just a good reminder that there are no separated things, you know, growth and in our case, digital ethics can meet, and it can be very profitable, you know.
Just to add to this, maybe a solution might be you give them a discount if they promise to visit their child, to see their child or grandchild more often, and that builds a relationship, right?
Thanks for the panel. I'd like to actually follow up on your lead a little bit. I had a question that was heading towards trust, and as well as your example, René, with I'm searching for toys. So maybe the context is I have a niece and la la. And so regarding trust, all I see is that if we want to answer this question and solve the problem, we need to know more of the context. So that leads me to asking questions to the users. If I am a good guy to ask, like, I need to know more about you. So now regarding trust, do you see a trust problem? Because sharing information so somebody can solve my problem, I mean, he needs to know me more and I need to share much more. And in an online setting, this might be very uncomfortable because we are trained in this anonymous kind of thing.
Yeah. Thank you for the question. And so here's the thing. With trust, right, there's interpersonal trust, right? And there's lots of theories on this. There's also consumer behavior trust. So when you study consumers and their interaction with them, like when brands talk to consumers or companies talk to consumers, there are larger generalizations we can make. It doesn't have to be interpersonal, right? Your retailer, so where you're going into search, and the customer, that's interpersonal, right? You do not have to customize trust, right? Trust, like people, again, I'm going to situate the answer in the user. There are ways in which users trust institutions, and it's very well documented in the literature. Trust and loyalty actually go hand in hand. So if you think about classic, theories of consumer psychology, the reason trust was promoted at some time in 2000s, 1990s and stuff, was because boosting trust would boost loyalty. And eventually that come back sustainability, things like that, right? So then you'd wonder, how do we increase trust? And usually trust is I know you talked about mechanization, but you can actually, from a psychographic perspective, you can actually metrify that. Essentially, people will trust entities. You can go through it in an affective route. You love a brand, you're going to trust it. You don't care what the news articles are saying. You're going to love the brand. And so companies will try and boost affect, making pretty websites, making the customer feel happy, showing pretty pictures. These are if you've seen some big retailers, if they go to a dead end for search results, they'll show you a cute dog or a cute cat or a little puppy, or what that's doing is boosting affect. That's saying, okay, don't get mad with me, I'll make you smile. So that's affective, and that does kind of have an influence on trust. The other thing is cognitive, and like I said, precision is one of them. Can I trust this entity? Are they reliable? Are they authentic? What the brand is or your e-commerce site is actually doing to have these really comparable parameters or comparable measures to boost trust. So to think that trust is personal, that's interpersonal trust. So if you think about it in terms of the e-commerce site or brand, boosting trust, now it becomes numbers, and certain strategies can be generalizable. They don't have to be personal. We don't need to have any personal information. You're a shopper, doesn't matter who you identify with, doesn't matter anything. There are certain standard practices that a brand could adopt to boost trust. And there's lots of literature on this for consumer behavior. Hopefully that's answering the question. Yeah.
Very, very quickly. Many of you spoke about models and stuff. You spoke about thinking of the problem and thinking on the value. I think it's a very good instrument for trust elicitation to begin that problem in consent management solutions. So when you think about you're going to create a model that is going to do X, Y, and Z, you have to begin the problem on the consent integrity. It's called the field within machine learning operations, consent integrity. That's very important. And the second instrument that we resource to is, of course, the honesty, transparency, and explainability. But yeah, of course, the interpersonal trust concept versus the corporate to individual. But for as a search engineers and search makers, look at consent integrity. I need to know that the model was created with over 18 people over 18 years old. I need to know that they clicked on accept cookies to create a better experience. Otherwise, those signals are unlawful. And I need to have instruments. I love the way, I think it was the Swedish company, the way they can explain their quick, fast filters, the notion of explainability around all that, etc. Anyway.
So it's a wrap. Thank you panelists. Fantastic. Round of applause, please.